Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about how a single river in the American heartland transformed from a wild frontier into a modern battlefield, and all in less than 100 years. For centuries, this river wasn't just a body of water. It was a line in the sand, it was a highway for armies, and it was a battlefield. So if this river could talk, what stories would it tell? Well, that's what we're diving into today, the stories of conflict and change that are literally etched into its banks. We're going to break down three really key moments in history to see how this river and the forts built along it didn't just shape the region, but really the entire country. Okay, so this timeline is basically our roadmap. We're kicking things off in 1774, back when the river was a raw colonial frontier. And we're going to follow its story all the way to 1863, when it becomes this complex, modern theater of war. So, back in the 1770s, you gotta understand, the Ohio is the edge of the known world for colonial America. And it wasn't a peaceful border. It was this constantly simmering zone of conflict. And that brings us to Lord Dunmore's War. Now, this wasn't a formal war like we think of today. It was a really brutal, messy struggle for control. Virginia's royal governor, Lord Dunmore, basically launched an invasion to crush tribal resistance and claim those rich hunting grounds for the colony. And this is how that conflict is remembered. This monument stands at Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and it marks the war's single bloodiest battle, a nasty, day-long fight right at the river's edge between the Virginia militia and warriors from the Shawnee and Mingo nations. Now, forts back then were a whole different ballgame. Fort Gower, for instance, wasn't some permanent stone fortress. Think of it more like a military pop-up tent. It was built fast, out of necessity, as a place to launch an attack from, not a place to live. It really shows you how temporary and campaign-focused that early frontier warfare was. Okay, now get this, because this is fascinating. These soldiers are deep in the wilderness, supposedly fighting for the British crown. But after the fighting's done, their officers get together and sign the Fort Gower Resolves. The quote you're seeing here, it's part of a declaration saying their real loyalty was to the colonies, not the king. It's one of the very first whispers of the American Revolution coming from the absolute edge of the frontier. All right, let's jump forward a bit to the 1780s. The revolution is over. The United States is a brand new country. And now it has to figure out how to actually govern all this new territory. The whole purpose of its forts is about to change. Big time. You see, it's one thing to own land on paper, but it's a whole other thing to actually control it. A powerful alliance of Native American nations was not having it, and they disputed the U.S. claims. So the young United States had this huge challenge. Could it actually enforce its laws and project power way out into the Ohio Territory? This was a real test for the new government. And their answer was Fort Harmar. Now, compared to that makeshift Fort Gower, this was a major upgrade. Fort Harmar was a serious, five-sided fortress. It was a symbol of permanence, of federal authority. It was built to last for years, not just for one campaign. And just look at the mission here. The soldiers at Fort Harmar weren't just fighters. They were basically a frontier police force kicking out illegal squatters. They were security guards for government surveyors, and they were a diplomatic presence during treaty negotiations. This fort wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about building a nation. Okay, now we're going to take a huge leap forward to the 1860s. The river transforms yet again. It's not just a frontier line anymore or a channel for expansion. It becomes a full-blown theater of modern industrial-scale war. So picture this. It's July 1863. Confederate General John Hunt Morgan leads 2,000 cavalrymen on this insane raid deep into the north. His main goal was to cause absolute chaos, to terrorize the local population, and, more importantly, to pull Union troops away from the real war effort down in Tennessee. Well, Morgan's long ride came to a crashing end right here, at Buffington Island, on the Ohio River. Union forces finally cornered him, and as you can see from the numbers, they brought way more firepower, not just on land, but from the river itself. And this was the Union's trump card. This wasn't just a cavalry chase anymore. The U.S. Navy had an entire fleet of steam-powered gunboats patrolling the Ohio. We're talking lightly armored tinclads and even some heavier ironclads. They could move faster and hit way harder than anything Morgan's men had. This was total war. The gunboats on the Ohio literally formed a wall of steel. They shelled Morgan's men as they tried to cross and ferried Union infantry over to cut them off. The very river that Morgan saw as his escape route, it became his cage. This was the only significant Civil War battle fought on Ohio soil. The fighting, of course, is long over, but the legacy of all these conflicts is still imprinted on the landscape, and sometimes in ways you really wouldn't expect. And this is just a perfect example of how history works, isn't it? On one hand, you've got some history carved in stone, like the monument at Point Pleasant. But other pieces, like that temporary Fort Gower, they've literally been washed away by time and the changing course of the river. So when you step back, you see this really clear evolution that perfectly mirrors the nation's own growth. The river transforms from just a simple frontier line to a national artery for expansion, and finally into a fully integrated theater of modern war. I think the big takeaway here is how one single geographic feature can play so many completely different yet crucial roles in a nation's story. The Ohio River wasn't just a river. It was a barrier, it was a highway, a prize to be won, and in the end, it was a weapon. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other battlefields do we drive past every single day? There's stories just hidden right under the surface of the world we think we know.